The porch light had been flickering all evening, weak yellow, like it was tired of being asked to shine. I was standing at the kitchen sink when I saw it through the window, a small shape near the iron gate, still as a fence post. For a moment, I thought the shadows were playing tricks on me again, but then he lifted his head, and I realized it was a boy holding something folded tight against his chest. I stepped out onto the porch slowly, the wood creaking under my weight like it was warning me to be careful. The night air had that early autumn bite, cool enough to make the breath feel sharp in the lungs. The boy didn't move, not even when I came closer and the porch light finally reached his face. Thin, pale, eyes lowered to the gravel, like he hadn't been taught what safety felt like. He clutched the fabric tighter, an old quilt, the kind I hadn't seen in half a lifetime. Even from where I stood, I recognized the faint pattern. Blue star, uneven squares. My hands had stitched every last one of them. I felt my stomach drop in a quiet, heavy way, like a drawer sliding shut. Even in, sweetheart, I said gently. You lost? He shook his head just once, the kind of shake that meant more than words should carry. I unlatched the gate, the iron groaning softly. The boy stepped back an inch, enough to show he'd learned not to trust porches or friendly voices too quickly. It's all right, I whispered. You cold. You can come inside. He hesitated, eyes drifting to the house behind me. I wondered what he saw, the porch sagging on one side, the chipped paint, the flower pots half empty from last winter. Nothing here was special. Nothing here was dangerous either. After a long moment, he crossed the gate. The quilt brushed against his arm as he moved. I smelled old cotton, rain, and something else, the faintest trace of camphor, the kind I used to keep in the storage chest decades ago. Inside the house, the floorboards greeted him with the same soft complaint they gave me every morning. I switched on the lamp, bathing the room in that warm amber glow old bulbs make when they've lived too many years. You can sit, I told him, nodding to the chair near the table. He didn't, he just held the quilt tighter. I noticed his fingers trembling, not from cold, but from something quieter, something heavier. Finally, he spoke. His voice was rough from silence. She told me you'd understand. Just that, no name, no explanation. Just a sentence that hit like a door creaking open into a room I'd locked long ago. I stared at the quilt again, at the stitching that had once been neat, the colors that had once been bright. I remembered sewing it by lantern light, young enough to believe secrets could be mended if you worked the needle steady enough. Who told you that? I asked softly. He raised his eyes for the first time. They were dark, guarded, too old for a boy his size. My mother. The porch light flickered behind us. And in that weak glow, I felt the past shift, like it had been waiting for this moment, patient as dust on forgotten shelves. I pulled out a chair. Come sit, honey, I whispered. Tell me why she sent you. But the boy only looked at the quilt, and the way he held it told me the answer wouldn't be simple, or gentle, or something I was ready for. I laid the quilt across my old kitchen table the way you'd place a fragile memory down, slow, careful, almost afraid it might crumble. The boy stood a few steps back, hands clasped as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to watch. The lamp above us flickered once, then held steady, casting a soft glow that made the faded threads look almost alive. I traced one corner with my fingertip, a blue star, uneven squares around it. A stitch pulled too tight on the lower edge, a mistake I remembered making on a night when I was too tired to start over. It was mine. There wasn't a shred of doubt left in me. The boy shifted his weight. The floor complained quietly beneath him. She kept it safe, he murmured. His voice drifted across the room like smoke, faint, unsure, carrying something I couldn't name. I looked up at him. He wasn't watching me. He was watching the quilt, the same way someone might look at a door that had been locked their whole life. How long have you had it? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. A while, he finally said. She kept it folded in a wooden box under her bed. She only brought it out sometimes when she thought I was asleep. Why? I asked softly. He shrugged, but it wasn't a real answer. It was the kind children give when the truth is too large to hold. I leaned closer to the fabric, letting the scent rise, old cotton, dust, and something faintly sweet, something familiar. Something that made my chest tighten in a way that wasn't quite pain. I lifted one corner of the quilt, and for the first time I noticed it, a small patch on the underside, stitched with thread a shade darker than the rest. A patch I didn't remember sewing. My fingers paused above it. What's this from? I whispered, more to myself than to him. The boy stepped forward just a little, just enough for me to hear the soft intake of his breath. She said it was from the day she left, he said, voice barely holding together. She made me promise never to open it. I looked at him sharply. Open what? He pointed at the patch. Something cold slipped down my spine. I pressed my thumb against it, feeling the slight ridge beneath. A hidden pocket, sewn shut with careful, deliberate stitches. Stitches I didn't recognize. I had never hidden anything inside this quilt, never stitched any pocket. Never used thread this dark. Did your mother ever say who made that? I asked quietly. This time his answer came without hesitation. She said she didn't do it. A beat. She said you didn't do it either. My breath stilled. The lamp hummed softly overhead, emphasizing the silence tightening between us. The room felt smaller, like the walls had drawn closer to listen. Then who did? I asked. The boy looked at me, really looked, for the first time since he arrived. His eyes held something unsettling, not fear exactly, but recognition, as if he expected me to know the answer already. I thought you'd tell me, he said. The quilt lay between us, quiet and heavy, like a truth waiting to be unstitched. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was inside. The kitchen felt colder than it should have been. Maybe it was the open window, or maybe it was the way the boy kept staring at the quilt like it might speak first. I stood there with my hands still on that dark patch, feeling the faint ridge beneath it when he finally whispered. My mother's name was Anandi. The sound of it hit me like a forgotten bell, soft, distant, but unmistakable. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 48 years. Not since the night she vanished from this town without saying goodbye to anyone except me. The boy didn't notice the way my fingers froze. Or maybe he did and chose not to say anything. He lowered his eyes again, the way children do when they drop a stone into a well and wait for the echo. You knew her, didn't you? He asked. The room fell so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, slow, steady, pulling the past closer with every click. I nodded once. I did. He didn't smile, didn't sigh with relief. He just held the truth like it weighed more than the quilt in his arms. What was she like? He asked. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How do you describe a girl who lived like a secret? A girl whose laughter always felt too loud for the house she grew up in, a girl who whispered to me that she wanted a life where she didn't have to look over her shoulder. Instead, I said the safest thing. She was kind. He waited as if expecting more, and when he realized I wasn't giving it, he stepped closer to the quilt. His voice dropped to a thin thread. She never told me where she came from. She never said why she left. She just said, if anything ever happened to her, I had to bring this to you. My stomach tightened. Why me? He shook his head. I don't know, but she told me your name the night he stopped. The silence that followed was too sharp. The night she what? I asked softly. He swallowed hard. His fingers curled into the quilt, wrinkling the fabric like he was afraid it might slip away if he loosened his grip. The night she died, he whispered. The words didn't sound real. They came out cracked and thin, like they'd been carried too far by a child who hadn't slept in days. My breath caught. Anandi gone, and she sent him here. What happened? I asked. He shook his head again, but this time it was different, not confusion, fear. I don't know, he said, but she told me something right before she went. The lamp above us buzzed, dimmed, then steadied as if leaning in. What did she tell you? I asked. He looked straight at me, truly looked for the first time. And in that moment, I saw something familiar buried in his eyes, something I couldn't place, something that didn't belong to a boy his age. She said, he whispered, that you were the only person left who knew the truth about her. A chill moved through me, quiet and certain, because the truth I knew about Anandi wasn't the kind a dying woman would pass to her child. And whatever she sent him here to uncover, it hadn't even begun to surface. I sat down slowly, the chair legs scraping the floor in a long, tired sound. The boy stayed standing, as if sitting might make the truth heavier. Outside, the wind pushed against the porch like it wanted to listen through the cracks. I folded my hands in my lap. I didn't think I'd ever have to talk about her again, I murmured. He didn't reply, just waited with that stillness children only learn from too much loss. I lifted my eyes to the quilt. Every square felt like a doorway now, a memory I had boarded shut. It was late, I began softly. Nearly midnight, the summer she turned 18. The boy leaned closer, barely breathing. She came to my back door with nothing but a small suitcase and a bruise on her cheek. I remember the moon was low, the kind of night where even the air feels like it's watching. I could see it again, the trembling hands, the swallowed sobs, the words she couldn't force past her lips. I let her stay, I said. Just for the night, that was all she asked. The boy's fingers tightened around the quilt. He didn't interrupt, he didn't need me to hurry. The next morning, I continued, she told me she was leaving town for good. She wouldn't say where, she said staying here wasn't safe for her. I paused. Safe from who? Back then I didn't ask, or maybe I was too afraid of the answer. The boy shifted his weight. Did she ever say if someone was after her? I met his eyes, the same dark, wary shade Anandi had when she lied to avoid breaking. She didn't say anything, I whispered. She just left, he exhaled shakily, a sound too old for a child his age. I continued, my voice barely above a breath, but before she walked out the door, she gave me something. The boy's head snapped up. What? I reached for the drawer of the side table, my hand trembling more than I wanted him to notice. The wood stuck for a moment, swollen from years of humidity, before it finally gave way. Inside was a small, folded scrap of paper, yellowed, brittle, edges softened by time. The boy stared at it like it carried a heartbeat. She left this on my kitchen counter, I said. Told me to burn it once she was safely gone. I placed it on the table between us. but I didn't burn it. His breath caught. Why not? Because I was a coward, because I wanted answers she never gave. Because I thought she'd come back someday and ask for it, but I didn't say any of that. I don't know, I whispered instead. Something told me to keep it. The boy reached out, slow and hesitant, touching only the corner of the paper like it might cut him. What does it say? He asked. I unfolded it. 3 words, written in her hurried, slanted handwriting. 3 words I had spent half my life trying to forget. I swallowed hard, then read them aloud. Don't trust him. The boy's face drained of color. His voice cracked. Who was she talking about? I looked at the paper again and realized something I had never seen before, something the boy noticed first. The ink wasn't faded. Not even a little. Someone had rewritten it, recently. By mid-evening, the sky had turned the color of bruised lavender, the kind that settles low and quiet before night truly arrives. Elinor had just finished washing the dinner plate she barely touched when she heard it again, the soft crunch of gravel outside her front steps. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, just one slow step, then another, the kind of footsteps belonging to someone who already knows the house. She froze, dish towel in hand. Her first thought was the boy, but something in the rhythm told her this wasn't a child. This was heavier, older, more deliberate. The porch light flickered again, the same way it had the day the boy returned the quilt. Elinor felt the back of her neck prickle, that same instinct she'd learned to trust back when her husband was alive. She moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtains, and peered through the narrow gap. A shape stood at the edge of the yard. Not close enough to be recognized, not far enough to dismiss. Still, silent, watching her porch like it was a place he'd been before and was trying to remember. Elinor's breath pressed tight against her ribs. She wanted to tell herself it was a neighbor, maybe someone walking their dog, but the figure simply stood there. No movement, no phone glow, no pet pulling at a leash, just a shadow with a posture that unsettled her, like he was waiting for something or someone. She stepped back, heart tapping a steady warning against her chest. The boy's visit, the quilt, his strange apology, everything suddenly rushed into her mind like puzzle pieces that weren't meant to fit but somehow did. She whispered to herself, what on earth is going on? Her voice felt too soft in the too quiet room. The footsteps resumed, slow, thoughtful, approaching her porch. Elinor's stomach tightened. She considered turning off every light, pretending she wasn't home, but something in her resisted that. If she hid now, she'd be hiding forever. She stood her ground, palms damp, breath shallow. Then came a knock, not urgent, not polite. Just 3 steady taps, the kind made by someone who wasn't afraid of being recognized. Elinor stepped forward, every muscle trembling. She placed her hand on the doorknob but didn't turn it. Instead, she asked, voice barely above a breath, who is it? No answer. Only the sound of wind pushing dry leaves along the porch boards. She asked again, louder this time. Who's there? Still nothing. And then just as her courage began to crack, she heard it, a low, familiar scraping sound. Someone was sliding something through the gap beneath her door. A thin rectangle, old paper, folded, carefully placed. Elinor didn't move at first. The house felt too small, the silence too heavy. Finally, she crouched down and picked up the folded note. The paper felt brittle, as if it had been kept for years in a place it didn't belong. She opened it slowly. There were only 5 words written inside, shaky, uneven handwriting. I know what you kept. Her breath vanished. The room seemed to tilt. How, who, what did they mean? What exactly did this stranger think she'd kept all these years? And more importantly, why come now? Elinor stared at the note until the letters began to blur. I know what you kept. Her fingertips trembled against the brittle paper, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. It had been decades since anyone had spoken about that part of her life, decades since anyone even hinted at it. The world had moved on, people forgot. Time had politely buried things that never should have been uncovered. So how could a stranger standing in the dusk know anything? She stood up slowly, her joints stiff, as if her body understood the danger before her mind did. The porch was silent now, too silent. Elinor forced herself toward the door and pressed her ear against it. Nothing, no retreating footsteps, no car engine, no rustling in the yard. Whoever had stood there was gone, or worse, still nearby. Her living room felt unfamiliar suddenly, as though someone had shifted the air while she wasn't looking. She locked the door, then checked it twice, her breath shallow. She moved through the house with an unsteady urgency, checking windows, blinds, the back door. All locked, all closed, but the feeling remained. Someone had been inside her world tonight, and they weren't finished. Elinor returned to the table and placed the note beneath the warm glow of the lamp. She leaned in, studying the handwriting, shaky but intentional, like someone trying hard to stay calm, or someone older, someone who had lived through the same years she had tried to forget. Her mind drifted not willingly, back to the winter she sewed the quilt, back to the old farmhouse before it burned, back to the guests she sheltered, back to the promise she made that no one else knew about. She pressed her fingers against her temples. No, she whispered to herself, it can't be about that, but a part of her, buried deep, feared it was. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound outside, a quick, sharp crack like a twig snapping under a careful foot. Alina stiffened, eyes widening. She reached for the lamp switch, extinguishing the room into a hush of darkness. Her breath came in quiet, careful pulls as she stepped toward the window. The yard lay there in soft moonlight, empty, still, harmless, yet the unease wouldn't leave her bones. She returned to the table, relit the lamp, and flipped the note over. Nothing on the back, no name, no explanation. Just those 5 words that seemed to burn into the paper. Then she noticed something strange, a faint smudge near the corner. Not dirt, not dust, ash. A thin streak of gray-black ash rubbed into the fold like the note had been kept near smoke or fire. Her pulse stumbled. The last time she'd smelled that kind of ash was the night everything changed, a night she had told herself would never return. Alina sat down, gripping the edge of the table as the questions tightened around her. Who wrote the note? How long had they been watching her? And if this was connected to the quilt or the boy, what piece of her past was stepping back into her life? One thought chilled her more than the rest. What if the person who came to her porch wasn't warning her, but reminding her? Night fell over the house like a blanket that refused to warm. Alina hadn't slept. She only sat by the kitchen table, the note placed in front of her like a quiet accusation. Every few minutes she'd lift her eyes toward the window, expecting nothing, fearing everything. When the old clock in the hallway clicked into 2:14 a.m., she heard it, not loud, not sudden. Just a slow, deliberate creak from somewhere outside, like someone putting weight on the wooden gate she hadn't opened in months. Her chest tightened, and she moved toward the window with the careful steps of someone older, someone who knew how fragile quiet moments could be. She didn't turn on any lights, she didn't want to be seen. Instead, she stood beside the curtain and eased it back just enough for one eye. At first, she thought the darkness was empty, but then a faint shape near the gate, still, watching. Almost as if it had been standing there long before she noticed. The moonlight caught just enough of it to make her breath hitch, a figure tall enough to cast a shadow across the gravel, but thin, almost boyish. Not grown, not fully. Her mind jolted. No, it can't be him, it's impossible. But the shape didn't move, didn't shift, didn't step forward or back, just stood, facing her house, as if waiting for her to speak first. Alina's throat tightened with an old fear she thought age had softened. She let the curtain fall and pressed her back to the wall, listening, trying to hear if the figure was walking closer. Nothing, just the wind brushing against the old siding. She waited 1 minute, 2, 5. She forced herself to look again, but when she eased the curtain back, the figure was gone. Only the gate remained slightly open now, something it hadn't been an hour ago. Her hands trembled as she locked the back door, then the side, then the front again. She whispered to herself, "It's just the wind," though she knew the wind didn't open gates or stand still in the moonlight. She returned to the table and studied the note again. "I know what you kept." The words felt heavier now, as if the writer had been close enough tonight to whisper them through the window if they wished. A small memory rose in her mind, the night decades ago when a frightened boy had appeared at her door. Dirt on his face, scratches on his arms, eyes wide with secrets he never spoke aloud. She never asked for the whole truth. She only offered shelter, warmth, and a blanket made from scraps of her old life. He had vanished the next morning, and the house fire, the rumors, the long silence that followed, all of it had stayed buried, until now. She glanced once more toward the window. A new detail caught her eye, a faint, dusty footprint near the edge of the porch step. Small, light, as if left by someone who didn't want to be heard. A shiver moved through her spine, slow and cold. Whoever stood by her gate wasn't finished. They were letting her know they could come closer. Anytime. Quietly, Alina exhaled, the breath breaking on the way out. One question rose above the rest, sharp enough to pierce the silence of her kitchen. If the boy had returned, why had he come back now, after all these years? And what did he want from her? Morning came late, or maybe Alina simply didn't notice the first few hours of light. She had dozed off in the armchair, still in her robe, still thinking about the figure by the gate. The house felt too still when she opened her eyes, as if it had watched her sleep and didn't want to disturb her. She rose slowly, joints stiff, mind fogged. As she moved toward the kitchen, something stopped her mid-step. A faint scrape against the floorboards, near the front door, too soft to be an animal, too purposeful to be the wind, her breath caught. She waited, heart thudding like a slow drum. Then it came again, a whisper of paper sliding across wood. Alina took one step, then another. Her cane leaned against the wall, but she didn't reach for it. She wanted her hands free. The house seemed to hold its breath with her as she approached the door. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. Only a sliver of pale morning light glowed beneath the crack. Then she saw it, a thin brown envelope pushed halfway inside. She hadn't heard anyone approach, and certainly not leave. A chill crawled up her arms. She knelt, wincing at the strain in her knees, and picked it up. The paper was cold. Damp around the edges, as if held by someone whose hands weren't fully warm. No address, no name, just a single symbol drawn in pencil at the center, a small square with uneven sides, almost like a child had drawn a window. She turned it over once, twice, nothing more. For a moment she thought about tossing it into the firebox without opening it. Some secrets, after all, had taken half her lifetime to bury. But curiosity tugged at her, the same way it once had when she was a young woman, always listening for footsteps that didn't belong to her father's house. Elinor slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a folded page, thick, old, rough to the touch, like stationery from decades ago. Beneath it lay something heavier, a photograph. Her hands stiffened before she lifted either. She didn't want to look. But she couldn't walk away either. She unfolded the page first. Only 3 words were written: "He remembered you." The handwriting was shaky, almost familiar, but she couldn't place it, not yet. Her fingers trembled as she turned to the photograph, and when she saw it, her breath left her completely. It showed her front porch, this porch decades earlier. The wood looked new, the railing freshly painted, and on the steps sat a boy, thin, tired, wrapped in her quilt, the same one returned to her days ago, the same one she'd sewn during a winter when she'd believed kindness still made the world softer, but the part that made her knees weaken wasn't the boy. It was what stood behind him, just inside the shadow of the doorway, the faint outline of a man, tall, watching the child sit there, a presence she never noticed back then. Elinor's heartbeat quickened. Was that shadow real, or just the camera catching darkness the wrong way? And if it was real, who was that man? Why had he been there? The photograph trembled in her hands. "He remembered you." She let the envelope fall to the table, her pulse unsteady. The boy from her past hadn't come back alone. Someone else had been watching, maybe all along. And now, she realized with a slow dread, someone wanted her to know it. Outside, a floorboard on the porch creaked, just once, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone anymore. For the rest of the morning, Elinor kept the photograph face down on the table. She didn't trust herself to look at it again. The image of the shadow behind the boy pressed against her thoughts like a thumbprint she couldn't wash off. Every time she passed the table, she felt it tug at her, a quiet, relentless reminder. By afternoon, clouds thickened over the house, dimming the rooms until every corner looked deeper than it should. The kind of gray that made a person check over their shoulder, even when they knew no one was there. Elinor lit a lamp, but the soft yellow did little to ease the unease in her chest. Her mind circled the same questions. Who pushed the envelope? Why now? And who was the man standing behind the boy in that old photograph? She knew she wouldn't find answers sitting in silence, but silence had become her habit and her protection. She walked slowly toward her bedroom, intending to rest for a moment, but stopped halfway. A faint vibration hums through the wall, soft, rhythmic, like someone tracing their fingers along the siding. It wasn't the wind. She'd lived in this house long enough to know every sound it made. This one didn't belong. Her pulse flickered. She pressed her palm flat against the wallpaper. There it was again. Light, precise, almost like knocking, but too cautious to be called that. Elinor stepped back. A whisper barely audible drifted through the wall. Not words. Not yet. Just the sound of breath on the other side, slow and deliberate. She felt her chest tighten. For years she had lived alone, listening only to her own footsteps, her own routines, her own soft conversations with memories. Now someone else was listening back. "Who's there?" she called, barely above a whisper. Her voice sounded small in the dim room, swallowed by the thick silence. The hum stopped. The wall went still, dead quiet. Elinor waited 1 second, two, a long 10. Then a sound flowed through the wall so quietly she thought she imagined it. A boy's voice, soft, young, almost careful. "I didn't know if you'd remember." The words froze the air in her lungs. She held her breath, afraid any motion would break the moment or invite something she wasn't ready to face. "Who are you?" she managed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her age, her fear, and the memories clawing their way up her spine. No answer, just the echo of the boy's breath fading into the wall as if he were stepping away or sinking deeper into the silence. Elinor pressed her ear against the wallpaper, ignoring how cold it felt. A faint rustle, footsteps, leaves, fabric brushing wood, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that the sound was moving toward the far end of the house, toward the back door. Her heart pounded as she hurried, slower than she wished, down the hallway. She reached the kitchen just in time to hear something small thud against the back stoop. She swung open the door. Cold air rushed in. No boy, no voice. Just an object resting on the step, a little wooden carving worn smooth by time. She picked it up, a small bird, hand-carved, exactly like the one the boy had held the night he slept on her porch all those years ago. Elinor swallowed hard. He wasn't haunting her memory. He was here, somewhere close, close enough to speak through walls, close enough to leave reminders at her door. One question rose above all others, filling her with a quiet dread she couldn't name. If the boy had returned his carving, what did he want her to remember next? Evening settled over the house with a heaviness Elinor hadn't felt in years. The wooden bird sat on her kitchen table, small and harmless, yet carrying a weight that pulled her chest tight. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward it, waiting for it to move or breathe or whisper the truth she wasn't ready to hear. By dusk, she could no longer sit still. The boy's voice through the wall, the footprint on the porch, the envelope under the door, her house felt too full of things she couldn't see, and too empty of the answers she needed. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, more out of habit than cold, and stepped outside. The sky was the color of old steel. The wind moved slow, dragging dry leaves across the yard like something half alive. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that her feet kept pulling her toward the orchard behind the house. The same orchard where she had once found the boy asleep beneath a tree, so small he had looked swallowed by the roots. Halfway down the path, she saw it, a faint glow, low to the ground, swaying, her breath stilled. It looked like a lantern, an old one, the kind that burned kerosene in memory. Someone had placed it at the foot of the apple tree closest to the fence. Eleanor slowed, her heartbeat loud enough to fill her ears. The lantern wasn't hers. Nothing in the orchard belonged to anyone anymore. No neighbors came this far. No children trespassed. No one even knew this path existed except the boy decades ago. As she approached, the flame flickered as if sensing her footsteps. The air smelled faintly of smoke and cold metal. A scent she hadn't breathed since the night the boy knocked on her door, shivering, terrified, asking for nothing but a place to sit. She knelt beside the lantern. Its handle was warm, freshly lit. Someone had been here moments before. Beneath it lay something else, a folded piece of fabric, tiny, frayed, a scrap of the quilt she had sewn and given him the night he ran from whatever haunted him. She reached for it with trembling fingers. The fabric was soft. Too soft for something that had lived outdoors for decades. This piece was new, cut recently, which meant the boy, or whoever carried the quilt now, had returned with intention, not by accident, not out of memory, but to send a message. Eleanor lifted the lantern, scanning the orchard. The shadows between the trees looked deeper than they should. One of them moved, a slim shape, not tall, not grown, just standing between the trunks, watching the way she held the lantern. A chill rippled up her spine. The figure didn't come closer, didn't run, didn't vanish. It just waited as if expecting her to speak first. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely enough to leave her throat. The figure tilted its head. A slow gesture, almost curious, almost familiar. Then a soft sound drifted across the orchard, not footsteps, not breathing, but humming. A lullaby, the same tune she used to sew by, tapping her foot while stitching the quilt pieces together. A tune she hadn't sung in 40 years. The figure stepped back into the darkness, the humming fading with it, leaving the orchard silent except for the soft burn of the lantern. Eleanor stood frozen, lantern in hand, fabric scrap in her palm, heart shaking in her chest. Someone wanted her out here tonight. Someone wanted her to remember the past one piece at a time. Someone was leading her somewhere. And as she stood in the cold orchard, her breath turning white in the air, one terrifying thought pressed against her ribs. The boy wasn't the only one who knew that lullaby. Something or someone else was coming next. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. The lantern from the orchard burned low on her table, its flame trembling like it feared the house around it. She sat in her chair, shawl draped around her shoulders, listening for any sound, a footstep, a knock, a breath through the wall. But the house stayed painfully still, almost waiting. By the time dawn brushed pale blue across the windows, the flame inside the lantern died with a soft sigh. The smell of cooled metal filled the room, the same smell she remembered from a night long ago, when a frightened boy had refused to speak his name and tucked himself beside the warm stove instead. She rose slowly and walked toward the back door. She didn't know why, only that her feet seemed to know before her mind did. The yard was washed in cold light. The orchard slept under a pale sky. Nothing moved. Then she saw it. A figure near the fence line, the same slim outline she had seen in the orchard. Only this time, it wasn't watching from afar. It was walking toward her, step by quiet step. Eleanor's breath thickened. Her hands fumbled on the doorknob. She opened it before she lost her courage. The boy, though older now, but still small, still carrying the weight of someone who never had a childhood, stopped a few feet away. His hair hung in front of his eyes. His coat was too thin for the cold, as if he'd borrowed it from someone who didn't care whether he stayed warm. In his hand, he held the wooden bird she had found on the stoop. The same one he'd clutched the night he first sought safety on her porch. "Why are you here?" Eleanor whispered. The boy lifted his head just enough for her to see the familiar fear in his eyes, but something else too, something like relief. "I didn't know where else to go," he said softly. His voice cracked on the last word like it hadn't been used in months. Eleanor felt her knees weaken. "How did you find me again?" He looked down at the wooden bird. "I never forgot the way back." A cold wind pushed between them, carrying the smell of wet leaves and old memory. Eleanor stepped aside, silently inviting him in. But he didn't move, not yet. "There's something I need to tell you," he murmured. "Something I couldn't say back then." Her heart thudded, slow, heavy, aching. "What is it?" The boy swallowed hard. "When I stayed here that night, I wasn't running from a place. His fingers tightened on the wooden bird. I was running from a person. Alina felt the world narrow. Who? His lips trembled as he said the name, a single word, barely louder than breath, a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in more than 40 years. A name she had buried so deep she'd forgotten the sound of it, a name that froze her spine, and before she could speak, before she could even breathe, he added, "He told me you'd remember when it was time." The wind stilled. The yard fell silent. The boy finally lifted his eyes. "Miss Alina, he's coming." And in that moment, every secret she'd buried felt suddenly, dangerously alive.